You're dealing with somebody who is very professional. They are trained in screwing up your mind.
The problem is most people think they are not going to get scammed. They're too smart.
The fraudsters are using artificial intelligence, particularly generative AI, to fake the voice of someone that we already know.
So hey everyone, welcome back to Heart of the Matter. I'm Stephen Chia. Now today we're going to be talking scams, and yes, we're talking about it again because scammers are on the rise. In the first 6 months of this year, nearly 23,000 people were affected by scams just here in Singapore. Now that's a whopping 64.5% increase from the same period last year. So today we ask who is responsible. Should banks or financial institutions pay for some of the losses? Or does the burden lie solely on the customer? How far should personal responsibility go, especially with those who might be more vulnerable around us? With me for the discussion today, Jansen Chow. He's co-head of Fraud, Asset Recovery and Investigations Practice at Rajah Tann.
Hi, Stephen. Pleasure to be here.
Assistant Professor Nydia Remolina from the Singapore Management University's Yong Pung School of Law.
Thank you so much, Stephen. It's a pleasure to be here today discussing this topic.
Ho Geer, whose mother lost over $190,000 to phone call scams.
Hi, Stephen. Thanks for inviting me on the show.
Jensen, let me start with you because a year ago when we recorded the podcast on scams, we focused on e-commerce scams. We actually even had a chance to speak to a scammer himself. Today, the scams have all mushroomed, and they're a whole, from malware to phishing. People are being scammed of their money in their bank accounts, even their CPF funds. So why does this continue to grow at such an alarming rate?
It's largely a lot of it has to do with the use of digitalization now, right? I think everyone is online. People are more exposed to it. I've seen people where they respond to ads, to investment scams, even on Facebook, on social media, and I think e-commerce. I think as you mentioned, so a lot of people are shopping online. They may or may not even know where the sellers are from, right? I mean, I've got my wife. She's up all night on these online websites. I don't know where she's shopping. Hopefully everything is fine, but I think people's exposure is just getting greater.
Isn't it funny? Online shopping, sometimes it's a gamble. I always assume that there's a 20% chance I may not get anything even after ordering it. But Geer, we want to hear your story. You say your mother got scammed. Give us a quick summary. What actually happened?
So she received a call from someone from SGH telling her that she had an outstanding amount of $1,000 over dollars that she has not paid. Because she goes to SGH for checkups and reviews and such. So she didn't suspect anything wrong. And then, but she said that she wasn't around during the period of time when they claimed that the transaction was made. Then the person said, okay, I'll refer you to the finance department. And then somehow it was being transferred to somebody who said that your identity might be stolen to use for money laundering. So she was scared, and then they gave her a number to the police and call, and then this person claimed that he was from the Outram police station. Within half an hour or 1 hour, she was being bombarded by a lot of information that confused her. And then over the next few days, they tried to build up the case that she was involved, and then she needs to cooperate. Right. And then MAS was involved, government is involved, and then if she doesn't cooperate, then she'll be jailed. Sue and jail. And because my mother is a PR, so she was afraid that if she does anything that is unlawful, then she will get sent back or revoked of her status or whatever.
Wow, so obviously she was frightened, but
yes,
but you realize that all these so-called authorized government agencies were not the real, genuine ones, right?
My mother was trained by me because I handle a lot of this like a scam thing, because in my job, actually I take care of students.
Okay.
And then I also did a few investigations for the students as well. And then I'm also a multiple victim of lower level scams. Right. So I lost a bit of things here and there, and then I gained experience. So I'm very comfortable in dealing with scammers and scams.
But you had no idea this was happening to your mother?
Yes. So for that 2 weeks, over the period of 2 weeks, my mother appeared normally.
Right.
And I only found out after I happened to check my bank account. There was actually $100,000 transferred out over a couple of days. Okay. It's in various amounts. So the first thing I was alerted, I called my mom. Did you actually transfer this? And then she said, yes, I did. I will explain to you. I'm very busy now. So I thought since she
Right.
already said that it was done by her, and then I also trusted that she would not do such a thing.
Okay.
Yeah, and so I didn't check until 2 days later. I went down again, and I asked her. She was very reluctant to tell me things, and I said, "Are you scammed?" She said, "No."
Right.
Okay, very typical victims' response that they don't believe that they're
Yeah,
scammed.
they think they're making the right decision. But
Yes.
eventually, she went on to make several withdrawals. And I
Yes.
understand even physically gave the money to someone who came to the house
Yes,
to
the
collect
mule,
it, correct? Yeah, so and all in all, I mean, at the end of it, when you told her what had happened and explained to her that she had been scammed, did she accept that?
No,
Oh,
I had to drag her to the police station. And then over that few hours, I could see that she was very confused, and she was made to believe that the story was true. And
Okay.
so actually, the scammers, they did a very good job in turning the psychology towards her and try to play along with the thing.
wow,
Yeah,
that
so
is true.
that was really scary because my mom wasn't that stupid, and I even actually live demo to her on a call with a scammer that this is what you should be dealing with. What are the
Okay,
telltale
okay.
signs? Things like that.
Wow, so Jansen, Nydia, you've heard the story. I mean, what do you think? This is one of those that it's hard to stop because the person truly believes they're doing something that's okay.
Actually, that's much more common than what we think. What you are just mentioning resonates a lot with the academic research on the field, because we might think that maybe one perfect solution or one ideal solution for this is to come up with preventive campaigns to educate financial consumers on how to make online payments and how to prevent to fall victims of these type of scams.
Right.
But actually, there are many behavioral elements of these cases and psychological elements that fraudsters use that make those preventive campaigns just one element in the big puzzle of
Right.
preventing these scams. So that's just one thing that policymakers should consider when thinking about the puzzle of solutions to prevent this from happening.
Right.
We cannot burden the financial consumer with everything in terms of preventing the scams.
But if you don't give them all that information, I mean, even worse things could happen, right? So what do you do then?
Do we need to change the liability regime applicable to these cases? Different jurisdictions have a rise to different solutions. There's no perfect solution to this.
Okay.
But for example, the UK have thought that maybe it's better to facilitate for financial consumers the way in which they ask for a reimbursement to the banks,
Okay.
even when they were negligent to
Right.
some extent.
We'll touch on that in a little bit when we talk about shared responsibility.
Yeah.
But Jansen, very quickly also, from your experience, how often are the cases that you encounter of this nature where people are, basically they are convinced that they were doing something that was perfectly all right?
It's really much more common than you think, and I think the fraudsters, the level of sophistication that they have now developed is much more than what we would have thought maybe 10, 20 years ago, where you get an email with full of spelling mistakes, a prince from a foreign land asking you to deposit money. I think they've gone beyond that. I think some of the ones that we've seen, for example, those email frauds where they hack into email accounts, we've seen situations where they've scammed even very sophisticated institutions. We've seen a situation where they are able to hack in at a point in time where there are 4 payments. They identify when the third payment is due. They hack in at the right period of time.
Wow.
They get the transfers, the bank details to be transferred. They even write the email as if it's done by the originator. A lot of times they are even just watching you. They've hacked into your system, but they're watching. They're hiding the emails that they sent out. So it gets quite convincing. I think there was one that I saw. The email actually even told the payer, "Don't call me because I'm at a funeral for my mom."
Wow.
So that's how they prevent someone from doing a physical call to check whether there is a right payment. So I think we've
Okay.
seen situations like this increasing.
Okay, so that's going to be really challenging. And in fact, I'm currently in the midst of working on a story for Talking Point about malware scams where people unknowingly download apps onto their phones which are malicious. And some of these apps can basically, they see everything that's happening on your phone, right down to your user ID, your passwords, your one-time PIN. So the question is, how much responsibility should then be on the user, the customer, and how much should be on the platform, the banks, or wherever we're keeping our money?
This is a very interesting question because even before thinking about changing the bank's responsibility on this, I would say that there are other stakeholders that we should enter in the picture.
Oh, who are these others?
For example, social media platforms or digital intermediaries that are the ones that, for example, disperse content online.
Take down the fake ads.
Take down the fake ads, for
I see.
example. So there are, for instance, some provisions in China that oblige these companies to take down fake information or fake
Right.
advertisements.
But there'll always still be a few that will slip through.
And it's a cross-border issue. So
Right.
on a worldwide level, China could do something, but if the US is not doing the same, and we interact with many platforms that are based in the US, well, that's not going to be applicable to them. So that's another problem, the cross-border issue. There is no perfect answer, as I said before, and jurisdictions have taken different approaches. In the US, for instance, with a situation that happened similar to what we saw in Singapore in 2022, in 2022 as well, in November, a big payment platform in the US had many customers falling victim of scams. So they decided to change their policy, and they were going to reimburse the
Right.
customers for those online scams when the payment was not authorized, without even considering the element of negligence. And the
Right.
bank that was liable, interestingly, in those cases, was the bank of the fraudster. So
Oh.
the recipient bank.
Okay. Well, essentially what you're saying is, in this case, there was some responsibility from the bank side. So even though,
Yeah.
as a customer, you lose your money, they will reimburse the money to you. So at the end of the day, the scammer gets his money, the customer gets his money, and the one that loses out is actually the bank.
Which means that maybe the costs of financial services are going to be higher for everyone, all financial consumers, those that are affected by the online scams, but also those of us who haven't been, fortunately, affected by those directly, because banks will need to bear those costs.
Yeah, but one can immediately argue that it doesn't seem to really make sense, because it then tells the customer, the user, that it's okay, I have insurance, so it doesn't matter what happens to me, somebody else will pay for it.
Totally.
Right? And then the fraudster will be more emboldened because he wins, the customer wins, and
Exactly. So there's a midpoint solution there. The UK, for instance, decided that they were going to reimburse customers only if there is no gross negligence
okay.
from the customer.
So
But-
Jansen, then, I mean, what do you make of this?
Actually, two things that I think Nadine mentioned. I think it's really a big issue. One, it's cross-border.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. How do you regulate the different banks? I mean, your paying bank might be from Singapore, but the recipient bank might be in a different jurisdiction. How do you then regulate another bank from a different jurisdiction? Right. So I think that's one of the big issues.
Okay.
The second one, as she mentioned, is the number of stakeholders involved. Right. If you want to have a framework where you try to apportion blame, again, every scam is different, involves different stakeholders. How then do you apportion? And I think the last point, as Stephen, you mentioned, is does it embolden the consumer? I mean, are we in a situation where if I see a deal that looks too good to be true,
Yeah.
20% annual return guaranteed, right? Most people will tell you it's a fraud, but you're thinking, maybe I'll take a try at it, since if I do get scammed, I might be able to seek reimbursement from the financial institute.
Yeah.
So I think that's where I think a lot of the difficulties come in. Where do you draw the line? And the sort of culpability of everyone. How do you
Right.
how do you weigh this up as a matter of actually it's a big question of policy, I think.
Let's say it's just within Singapore, for instance. Could something like that work? I mean, we're a fairly small country. We can be tightly controlled if we want to, but I mean, could you see this kind of a shared responsibility, working in our financial system here?
I think if you're just talking about limiting it to a single jurisdiction, because that's what's actually been done in the UK. They're putting out consultation. What they're planning to do is to get the financial institutions to sort of reimburse. They call it the reimbursement requirement. Sort of the main idea behind them is that the banks or the payment services are the best people to sort of deal with this issue, using fraud surveillance, data-driven tactics that they themselves are able to sort of put in the monies. So I think that's how they've sort of rationalized it. Of course, there's been some feedback to some of the points that I think we've mentioned, but I think they've sort of taken that look. I think we're looking at an outcome-based approach in trying to make sure that the individuals that have been scammed, because some people you can lose, your life savings, and
Would the banks have any incentive to want to do that?
I guess if there is a legal obligation on them, where they may be potentially liable to reimburse, then it might drive them to improve their systems. I think the good thing about a lot of our banks here, they've already set up quite a lot of systems. I think for the last few years, I think given the number of fraud cases that we've been dealing with, they've been trying to improve. But then you also have to start thinking about what if it's not just the established banks? What if once you have the smaller e-commerce platforms, you have the smaller payment services, right? How do they have the financial ability to sort of put in these systems in place, right?
And actually, it's not just the technology, because you can have the most sophisticated, security and online banking system. But Geer, for instance, in your case, I mean, your mum went down and she did ask the teller. The teller actually did ask her, "Are you sure about this transaction?"
Yes.
Right? And if she says, "Yes, I'm sure," it's my money, give it to me, essentially, right?
Yeah.
Nothing could have stopped that, right?
We also have to consider cases where technology doesn't work at all. So in this case, it's all cash. So even if you seal all the routes for the movement of the transfer of funds, then the scammers, they know that the oldest way is the usual way. I get somebody to carry the cash, and then I try to move the cash around by laundering or transferring or buying something and move it out. So personally, for my case, I have some questions for the banks. So for example, when the first 70,000 was moved out of the bank, why wasn't I informed as a joint account holder?
So you should have got an email notification or something.
An SMS,
to say,
yes.
right?
I do for my own account where she has the name. Yeah, but for her account, which I'm actually managing it digitally all the time.
Right.
Yeah, she withdrew the first 70,000 out. I wasn't involved. The next day, another 10,000 through ATM. And next day, another 10,000, 20,000 out. I wasn't informed at all until 1 week later when I happened to check my bank account. Then I realized that 100,000 was gone.
Right.
So if I could have known earlier, I could step in and I can stop the other 92,000 from being scammed.
So fair enough. This is a joint account, so you should have received some kind of notification. But then, because sometimes you can also untick the box for notifications in the online banking system, right? So
if that's the case, if I accidentally uncheck something, then maybe they should have sent me a notification saying that you have unchecked. Are you sure you want to do this or something? Remind me, because I might have accidentally unchecked that. I find it very ridiculous for me to actually check all the notification for myself and I uncheck everything for my mom's account.
Yeah, exactly.
I have several joint accounts with my wife, my kid, all this. None of them send me anything of foreign transactions, except for my own main account.
So this one is interesting because it's a joint account, so you're sharing it with someone.
Yeah.
So ideally, if it allows you to, leave the notifications on, you should get some kind of
yes,
alert.
by default.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I shouldn't. And then the other thing also, like what you mentioned, that the bank teller, the counter actually asked my mom, "Auntie, are you scammed?" I think anybody in the right mind, even the victims and the scammers would have told my mom, "You are not scammed," and she believes that she's not being scammed.
That's true.
And then the scammer will probably tell her, "Do not tell the teller that you are being scammed, or else you won't get the money." So nobody in the right mind will actually say that, "Yes, I'm scammed. Please help me."
So to be fair to the teller, I mean, she's probably got a checklist of ask these 5 questions and see how people react, But Nydia, what do you think? Because, the situation, it sounds like if the notifications were not on or deliberately put off, then there's some fault on the bank side. But if not, then it's entirely the user's issue, right? Again, how do you, apportion blame, so to speak?
That's very difficult. And actually, banks, because of what has been happening after the pandemic and this digitalization in financial services, even when you tick the box of not receiving notifications, some banks are trying to analyze the pattern of transactions nowadays, and they block certain transactions. Even when you tick that box of, I don't want to be notified. This is, as an anecdote, this happened to me. I wanted to transfer some value to my sister. She's currently living in the UK, and I've never done transfers to the UK. So the bank blocked my transfers. I tried to do that for a couple of days, and it was blocked.
Because it's an unusual behavior.
It's an unusual behavior from the financial consumer. So that could be something that, in terms of due diligence, the bank could implement. And they are trying to do this worldwide, but particularly in Singapore right now, on more as the result of this learning process of online scams and frauds in payments. But this could be something more structured in the way of being part of this conversation between the different stakeholders to come up with a solution for this.
And with artificial intelligence, I'm sure you can, detect patterns more easily.
Exactly.
So this sounds like one possibility. and it could have helped alleviate what Geer Hao went through. I mean, but then some will argue that, like with the OCBC app, they had certain protections in place, but it was also blocking out other legitimate apps. Customers felt that now it's inconvenient.
Like in my case, my transfer was legitimate, but it was blocked several times.
What did you have to do? Did you have to physically speak to someone?
I had to call the bank, yes.
All right. I mean, what would have worked for you, Geer Hao? If you had, I guess if you had got a notification, you would have gotten to say, hey, what's going on?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. So I think the least that the bank could have done was inform the joint account, which is me, to verify that, hey, your mom, who is already 76, is drawing a $70,000 cash. Are you aware of this? Or like what they are doing in China, they call the police.
Oh.
So they withhold the transaction until the police arrive and verify it.
But only because normally you take out, 200, 500 at one time. Suddenly you're doing 10,000. So it is an unusual behavior, right?
A lot of this, we're talking about sort of preventive measures that's being taken. I think a lot of it is in place. But I think if we have a situation where the individual, unfortunately, believes the scam so deeply that even though people are telling you or asking you, is it a scam, they still proceed with it, right? I think that's that's another sort of issue that we then have to deal with. I mean, actually, there's a recent case in the UK. I think Nadine's probably quite familiar with it. Philips and Barclays Capital. So in that case, the victim was so convinced that there's a big fraud and they're going to lose all their money inside. Even the police came and told them that, look, you might be involved or that there's a fraud that's been perpetrated on you. But because the fraudsters told them not to trust the police, not to speak to the police, they just refused to acknowledge that and still continued to go ahead with the transaction. So the monies went out.
Yeah, but you see, one will argue that's something that, where the plan goes all the way through. But if you were able to pick things up at stage 1 and 2, there's a higher chance you could have stopped it.
Right now, I mean, there are a couple of ways that you have to deal with it, I guess. One is the preventive method. So I think people are putting in place all these, we get all these a million checkboxes that we have to click on whenever we go to the app. I get a notification of on SMS, email every time I do a single transaction. Even when I park the car, $1, I get an SMS. But I think it's necessary in a sense. But that doesn't stop everything. The next issue that you sort of have to look at, it's sort of assuming it's gone through. How do you then apportion the blame?
Yeah.
Right. I think that's a bit different from the preventive measures that we've been talking about.
Yeah, and I would like to add something to what you just said, because with the rapid advancements on technology, this is becoming a much more complex issue. Why is that? Because now the fraudsters are using artificial intelligence, particularly generative AI, to fake the voice of someone that we already know, your mom, for example. And I actually legitimately think that my mom is the one calling me and asking me to make a transfer. So the bank, even if the bank calls me, no one is going to convince me that that wasn't my mom. But the bank, even if they have these preventive measures implemented, because there are some technology companies that will help them create patterns to determine that there was a AI generated type of voice, the bank is not going to convince me that is not my mom.
Yeah, and to be fair, to ask the bank to keep checking every time you make a transaction is a bit onerous as well. And so we're left with the question of what do we do? How do we find that balance, that sweet spot that allows us to have the convenience of modern technology and our finances, while at the same time keeping us safe to a certain extent, especially those who may be less aware of the digital platforms and how to use them. Geer Hao, if you look back now at this situation, what do you think could have helped avoid something like that from happening? Are you doing anything differently now for your mom?
I have been managing all her finance, all her money all the time. So other than then she physically goes to the bank and take the money, everything was controlled by me. Yeah, so now I diligently kept the limit of everything, which is a pain, at $500. The system is designed in such a way that if you need to transfer anything above or you need to change the limit, you need to painfully change the limit one by one. You need to raise the lower limit, the top limit, and then the lower limit, depending on which one you want to do, the pay now, the fast, or whatever. And then after that, you need to again lower the limit one by one. There's probably nothing I could have done now, but I would have educated her differently. So that's what I'm trying to do for all my friends. After the incident happened, the police actually kindly arranged for a counseling session for her. During one of my lectures when I was learning university is that there's this thing called the cognitive dissonance. So I explained to her the theory so that she doesn't feel so ashamed about herself being stupid, because it's not actually her fault. You're dealing with somebody who is very professional. They are trained in screwing up your mind.
So now, is she convinced that she was scammed?
Yes. After the police report and everything, I sat down with her, and then she broke down and cried.
Okay.
And I think it's a relief, because I think for the entire period of 2 weeks, she was living in constant fear and also believing that she was under investigation. So until this thing was cleared, it was a relief for her. Yeah,
Okay.
but she was actually living in shame. She doesn't even want to share the story.
Yeah, but I guess for your mother, it was really her coming to terms with the fact that it had happened and understanding, how it had happened. So you had a very difficult journey. Jansen, what do you think? What can we do better?
I mean, I don't think there's a single thing that's gonna work. There's no foolproof plan. I think you're really looking at one, obviously, is education. I think that's what Kyle is doing, and then just bringing it out to the masses. Because the problem is, most people think they are not gonna get scammed. They're too smart. All these boxes they don't want to read. If you go to a lot of these bank websites, there are a lot of write-ups on how to avoid scams.
Right.
But I'm quite sure most people don't spend the time to read through. So education, I think it's one. Two, I think the preventive measures, not just by the banks. I think increasingly in Singapore, we've seen now you get the +65 phone calls if it's a spoof call. I think Singapore government has set up a scam shield. So they have different ways that they're just trying to put layers of preventive measures. So that's another way through the stakeholders. And I guess the one that they're really looking at now, it's assuming everything's gone haywire. How do you sort of help the victims?
Okay.
Right? I think that's what they're really looking at now, which is really quite a difficult thing to sort of balance,
Right.
As a matter of policy and with individuals involved.
So that's the whole idea of shared responsibility. How
Yeah.
much should be apportioned to the bank and how much to the individual? And do you think banks are doing enough today, or can they do more?
I mean, I think they are trying. I mean, as I said earlier, they send me SMSs, emails, just over every transaction that comes up on my credit card, everything pops up. I get an email. There are all these limits that they allow you to set. When I try to make a transaction, I get calls from the banks.
Okay.
So I think they are trying as well. But again, it's hard to sort of it's hard for them to be the parent, right? That's not a bank's duty. I mean, a bank's duty is to be act on your instructions, right? It's not there to parent you,
Right.
tell you that you're making bad choices. I don't think we want that as well. If I want to buy an extra cake, I don't want a bank to tell me you shouldn't eat that cake tonight. Where do we draw the line, right? If they
Yeah.
become
Okay.
too involved.
I totally agree with what you both said, but maybe I would add to that a set of solutions or possible elements in the solution to engage more with in cross-border conversations on this. So in the financial sector, we have seen this before in terms of capital requirements applicable to the financial sector, prudential requirements, preventing money laundering. So maybe we need to start a much stronger conversation, a stronger debate on how to prevent payment frauds
Right.
on a cross-border level. Which is something that we have done in the past, but not as strong as in these other fears
Okay.
that I was mentioning before, such as
Is
money
that
laundering.
are you saying that
so
because you
on.
feel that a lot of it is because these syndicates work on a very international scale?
Exactly.
Right. So that would help prevent some of it from. I guess if you talk to each other a bit more.
Or maybe create a solution on a cross-border level in terms of collaboration between different jurisdictions and authorities located, or even industry players in different jurisdictions in terms of how to trace
Okay.
the monies, how to help customers to get their monies back, something along those lines.
If you're a financial hub, you want to make the transactions easy, but at the same time, you're saying make it a little bit more difficult, have a few more steps in place. And I guess that's the hurdle we're stuck at. So yeah, the convenience we get from our one little device is pretty amazing. The question should be, is the bank a parent? And how do you treat your bank? If you choose to untick all the boxes, to set crazy, unnecessary credit limits for yourself, then you leave yourself more vulnerable to what could happen. And as you know, with the event of deep fakes, as Nydia has mentioned, and very elaborate scams, it is harder to tell what is true and what is not. I don't think we can come to any solution today, but I think we're hoping to all listeners as well that this has created a bit more awareness, and you'd be a bit more careful, or as we say in Singapore, I guess it's better to be a bit kiasu, right? I get notifications for every $2 transaction too, So thanks to my guests for coming in as well, and to all of you who have been listening to us here on Heart of the Matter. And of course, leave us a review and any feedback. We do love to hear from you. And the team behind Heart of the Matter is Jacqueline Chan, Jesselyn Tan, Joanne Chan, Tiffany Ang, Saya Win, Crispina Robert, and me, Stephen Chia. I'll see you again soon. Bye for now.